He had only asked for room cleaning. But when he opened the door, there stood a 7-year-old girl, holding a mop, carrying the weight of a whole life in her eyes. In that moment, he wasn't a businessman, not a CEO. He was just a man, forced to face his past. This little girl, a total stranger, was about to uncover the biggest secret of his life. Before we dive into the story, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. Because sometimes, the person who changes your life isn't someone you expect, but someone you've never even met. Daniel Webber was known as a genius in the business world. Every industry he entered, every brand he touched, he worked miracles. But that day, his past full of achievements felt like it was suffocating in his luxury hotel room. His mind was cluttered. An upcoming merger deal, unexpected internal issues, and more than anything, loneliness. In a softly lit room, Daniel had collapsed into an armchair, staring blankly at his laptop. The room cleaning he'd requested still hadn't arrived. Frustrated, he hit the button above the bell. It had been half an hour. He was staying in a suite that cost thousands a night, yet getting none of the service. Finally, a knock on the door. Daniel said sharply, "Come in." But the person who entered wasn't an adult employee. It was a little girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old, wearing a worn-out dress that reached her feet. Her hair was messy. She was holding a mop and a bucket. Her head was slightly bowed, but her eyes were bright. She looked nervous but determined. Daniel didn't react at first. This was not what he had expected. His first thought was that this had to be some kind of prank. But the tired yet serious look in the girl's eyes silenced everything. "I'm here to clean, sir," she said in a soft voice. Daniel stood up, his tone sharper now. "Who are you?" "They're letting kids work here." The girl lifted her head. Her eyes were dark brown. "My name's Emma. My mom is sick. I came instead of her today. It'll only take a little while." Daniel suddenly felt a swirl of emotions. He should put an end to this nonsense called the front desk, alert management. But at the same time, something inside him stirred something he hadn't felt in years. Compassion, maybe something else. The fragility in her voice opened a door to another life. "Before you clean my room, tell me, why are you really here?" he asked. Emma looked away. "My mom used to work here, but she got sick last month, can't walk anymore. They were going to fire us. The manager said if the work gets done, she'd still get paid. It was supposed to be my mom's shift today, so I came." That moment, Daniel realized for the first time he was facing something just as important as a business deal. He thought about his own childhood, his mother, his father who left them, and then his eyes landed on Emma's worn-out sneakers. "Forget the cleaning. You're having breakfast with me," he said. Emma froze. "But I need to work." Daniel shook his head. "This isn't a command, it's an invitation. You're hungry. A girl your age shouldn't be cleaning rooms. You should be eating well and feeling safe." The world outside the door seemed to stop. Just then, a scream echoed down the hotel hallway. Staff were rushing around. A man had collapsed. He was having a heart attack. Daniel ran after Emma. In the chaos, he grabbed her wrist and pulled her to the side. Through the crowd, a woman, eyes full of panic and tears, was searching for her daughter. "Emma." Emma called out right away. "Mom." The woman was in a wheelchair. Her face was pale. In that moment, Daniel understood everything. Sometimes life doesn't come at you with balance sheets. It sends a little girl to remind you what truly matters. And that reckoning was just beginning. That morning, Daniel didn't attend a single meeting. He shut his laptop, silenced his phone. For a man like him, that was a radical shift. But something inside him whispered that he was standing at the edge of something he hadn't felt in years. Conscience, curiosity, maybe even humanity. Emma's mother said her name was Miriam. Her face was pale, but every time she looked at her daughter, she lit up inside. Daniel invited them to breakfast, not in the hotel lobby, but in his own suite. Because now, he felt the need to protect something from the outside world. Maybe Emma, maybe himself. At the table, Emma slowly opened up. Her face looked as cheerful as the strawberries on her pancakes. For the first time, Daniel heard her laugh. Fragile, but pure. Miriam seemed embarrassed at first. "I'm so sorry. This is all just unexpected." Daniel raised his hand gently. "You didn't ask for anything. No one should have to work when they're sick. And no child should be carrying weight like this." There was a silence in the room for a moment. Then Emma pointed at the painting on the wall. "That man looks like my dad." Daniel flinched. "Do you know your father?" Emma nodded. "Just from a photo. Mom always hides it. But I look at it in secret at night." Daniel turned to Miriam. She looked away. Her eyes were misty. Emma's father. He's not as far away as you might think, she whispered. But it's not easy to explain. Daniel sighed. I guess we're not really dealing with easy things these days. The conversation seemed to end for a while, but Daniel kept hearing one sentence in his mind. He's not as far away as you might think. What did that mean? Was Emma's father really still in this city? Or was he someone from Daniel's own world? As the day went on, Daniel offered to take Emma and Miriam home. They resisted, but finally agreed. They lived in a rundown old building on a narrow back street. There was no elevator. Because Miriam was in a wheelchair, she always had to stay on the first floor. When Daniel stepped inside, it felt like he had entered a different world. There was only one picture on the wall, faded, in a cracked frame. A young man stood behind a woman, smiling at her. Daniel leaned in. His heart started racing. The man in the photo looked familiar, because that man was his own brother. Beneath the photo, a note written in pencil read, "Things could have been different, Em." Daniel's mind was spinning. Was Emma's father his brother? Just then, Emma appeared behind him. "That's my dad," she said quietly. Daniel closed his eyes. The past had suddenly invaded the present. And this wasn't just a child's story anymore. It was a buried family secret. Daniel couldn't sleep all night. As he stared out the suite window, he felt like he didn't even recognize his own hands anymore. That powerful CEO, the man who ruled the world from the top of a hotel, had suddenly fallen through the cracks of the past. His brother, Mark, the brother he hadn't spoken to in years, hadn't even seen his face. That huge fight in the family. Inheritance, pride, responsibility. And Mark suddenly disappearing one morning. Daniel had buried it all under work and business. But now, through the eyes of a child, he remembered again what it meant to be abandoned. When morning came, Daniel knocked on Miriam's door again. This time, he wasn't just bringing breakfast, he was determined to bring answers from the past too. When Miriam opened the door, there was a tired smile on her face. "You know now, don't you?" she said directly. Daniel lowered his head. "Is Emma Mark's daughter?" Miriam slowly nodded. "Yes, and she's your niece too." Daniel's voice tightened. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" Miriam looked down. "Because Mark didn't want me to. After he left, he said he wanted to cut all ties with the past. It was a hard decision for him. But the harder part for me was raising Emma on my own, especially knowing the kind of family she might face ones who never knew her. I couldn't do that to her." Daniel brought his hands to his head. "Where is Mark now?" Miriam's face turned pale. "I don't know. He left a letter 4 years ago and vanished. We haven't heard from him since. No phone number, no address. All we have left is that photo." Daniel looked again at the photo hanging on the wall. Mark was there, smiling, but something was hidden behind that smile, like the weight of a secret. Just then, Emma walked into the room. She was holding a small box. She handed it to Daniel. "I found this in the closet. It has your name on it." When Daniel opened the box, inside was an old watch. The strap was worn, but the engraving on the back was still clear. Time sometimes pulls us apart, but sometimes it brings us back. Daniel's hands trembled. This wasn't just a watch. It was a silent apology from Mark. Maybe a last message. Maybe a call. Maybe a second chance. At that same moment, someone was watching them from outside between the streetlights. His eyes were hidden, but the scar on his face was clear. The man stood still for a while, then walked away. Emma glanced out the window. There was a man just now, but he left. Miriam's eyes widened. What? What did he look like? Emma shrugged. He had a scar. His eyes looked like they were crying, but he wasn't really looking. Daniel jumped up. Could it be him? And in that moment, they all realized the past hadn't returned just to be remembered. It had come back, to finish what was never resolved. That morning, for the first time in years, Daniel didn't go to work. Instead of a suit, he wore a simple jacket. In his hand was that old watch. The words engraved on it still echoed in his mind. Time sometimes pulls us apart, but sometimes it brings us back. The man Emma described kept haunting him like a shadow from the night. That scar, those eyes, it was Mark. Even if he wasn't completely sure, his heart already knew. And this time, he wasn't going to run from the past. At first, Miriam objected. If that man really was Mark, and he hasn't looked for us in all these years, maybe there's a reason. Maybe he doesn't want to come back. But Daniel shook his head. Even if he doesn't come back, I'll find him. Because this story isn't just his. It's Emma's too. And mine. If something's left unfinished, it can't be complete without facing it. He started by tracking down old friends. One of Mark's university buddies still worked at a carpenter's shop in the same neighborhood. When Daniel talked to him, the man looked wary at first, then let out a deep sigh and nodded. Mark showed up here a few years ago. He looked worn out, didn't want to talk, just asked for a few pieces of wood. But his hands were still skilled. That's when I first noticed the scar. It looked like he'd been in a fight, but with his own soul. Daniel's throat tightened. Mark was alive. He was nearby, and still wounded. The trail led to an old cabin. Outside the city, at the end of a road nearly erased from the map, hidden among misty trees. The door was broken. The windows were covered with newspaper, but smoke was rising from inside. He was alive. Without hesitation, Daniel pushed the door open. Inside, someone with his back turned was tending to a stove. His shoulders were slumped but still strong. And when he turned his head, yes, there he was. Mark. Their eyes met. Two brothers, after all these years, just stared at each other without a word. The silence replaced all speech. The years between them, the fights, the silence, none of it mattered now. But still, Daniel spoke. There's a girl, he said. Emma. She's 8. Her eyes look like yours. But her heart, it's broken. Mark closed his eyes. He turned his back to the stove. I know. Those 2 words stunned Daniel. You know? Then why didn't you come? Why did you leave them alone? Why did you shut me out, bury the past? Mark looked at his reflection in the stove's metal, like he was seeing himself for the first time. Because I was scared, he said. Of myself. Of them. I thought I wouldn't be a good father. But now I understand being absent is even more cruel than being a bad one. Daniel quietly took off his watch. He placed it in Mark's hand. You left this. But time is still with us. If you're willing. It's not too late. Mark's eyes filled with tears. He looked at the words on the watch. Then back at his brother. Will Emma accept me? Daniel's voice softened. First, forgive yourself. The rest is up to a child's heart. Just then, rain began to fall outside the cabin. But inside, for the first time in years, someone was tending to the fire again. The next morning, the streets were still wet. Gray clouds covered the sky as Daniel's car came to a quiet stop in front of Miriam's apartment building. Mark, sitting in the passenger seat, had his hands tightly clasped on his knees. His whole body was tense, down to the tips of his fingers. It wasn't just months, it was years of weight on his shoulders. Sometimes running away brought solitude, but some escapes only changed the shape of pain. He had lived that. Instead of becoming a father drowning in alcohol at night, he chose absence. But now a child was growing up without waiting for him. And that truth was heavier than running. When Daniel stepped out of the car, Mark hesitated. He leaned his head against the window and took a deep breath. What if she doesn't recognize me? He said, his voice cracking. What if she hates me? Daniel turned to him. She's a kid, Mark. What she holds in her heart isn't anger, it's emptiness. And when emptiness is filled, love can grow again. Mark nodded, but when he swallowed, his throat was tight with emotion. Finally, he opened the door. As his feet touched the ground, his knees trembled. Maybe being a father wasn't about blood, it was about courage. When Miriam opened the door, she froze for a second. Her eyes scanned Mark. Time had changed him, but those eyes. Yes, she recognized them. Her voice came out low. Emma's inside. We're reading a book together. Mark lowered his head. I wanted to run when I saw you. But when I heard about Emma, this time, I didn't leave. Miriam said nothing. She opened the door a little wider. It felt like silent permission. When Mark stepped inside, Emma was sprawled out on the couch, sketching something in her drawing book. The room wasn't filled with childish cheer, but a quiet sense of focus. Emma looked up. She smiled when she saw Daniel, but then she noticed the man behind him, and her pencil dropped from her hand. Her eyes widened. Uncertainty washed over her face. She stood on that fine line between recognition and unfamiliarity. Mark took a few steps forward but couldn't speak. He knelt down slowly in front of Emma. When they were eye level, his eyes were filled with tears. Hi, Emma, he said. I'm Mark. I'm your father. In that moment, time stopped in the room. Emma tilted her head. Her lips parted, but no words came out. Her eyes locked with his and silence filled the space. Then, she slowly came closer. She sat down in front of him. Her small hands reached out and touched his. You're the man from the photo, she said. Mom always looked at it when she cried. Mark couldn't speak. He only lowered his head. Tears fell onto his knees. Emma moved in a little closer. Why did you come? Mark's voice was broken. Because I'm not afraid of losing anymore. I'm afraid of being too late. I didn't want to go another day without knowing you. Emma looked at him. A long, slow gaze. Then she opened her arms. It was a simple, hesitant, but honest gesture. Mark froze. Then he leaned into those arms. Those tiny arms were now wrapping around years of longing. Daniel stood at the edge of the doorway, watching them. Miriam was wiping away tears. No one said a word, because sometimes the strongest sentences aren't written with words, but with hugs. And that day, in a worn-out living room, beneath the shadows of cracked picture frames, a family was rebuilt. Days passed. Mornings no longer started with silence, but with cheerful voices around the breakfast table. Every morning, Emma asked her father a new question, and every night she fell asleep with her head resting on his shoulder. And Mark, he was learning how to be a father, a little more each day. Their bond stood on fragile trust, a bridge not easily built, but once it stood, it didn't shake. And on both ends of that bridge were hearts that no longer wanted to run. Daniel started visiting them more often. One day, he even found himself in Emma's sketchbook. There he was, drawn beside Miriam, Mark, and Emma, all holding hands. And underneath, Emma had written in big letters, "My family." That one word shattered the loneliness Daniel had carried inside for years. He had never married, never had children. It had always been about work, success, power. But now this little girl, with a single word, had given him what he'd been missing most: belonging. One evening, while Daniel was making tea with Miriam in the kitchen, the topic came up. They deserve a new home, he said. This old building, with no elevator, damp walls. It's not enough anymore, especially now that they're starting over. Miriam stayed quiet for a moment. A house from you would be a precious gift, she said softly. But the real gift is you, Daniel. They gained you. Daniel lowered his head slightly. And I gained them. 2 weeks later, Mark and Emma moved to a small but warm house just outside the city. It had an apple tree in the yard and a swing on the porch. There was a special room for Miriam, to no more getting stuck at doorways in a wheelchair. And for Emma, a little desk by the window, a space to dream. One morning, while Mark was sitting on the porch, Daniel showed up. He had an envelope in his hand. There were some papers I had to sign, he said with a smile. Mark opened the envelope, his eyes scanning the pages. A strange expression spread across his face. The house you're living in is yours now, Daniel said. And there's an education fund set up for Emma. It's time to start thinking about the future. Mark couldn't find words. His eyes filled with tears. But what did I ever do to deserve this? Daniel, without turning around, replied, You survived and you came back. You had the courage. That's the greatest thing anyone can deserve. That afternoon, Emma was sitting on the swing in the yard. The sun was slowly setting. Daniel walked over and sat beside her. You know, he said, sometimes the most important stories begin with something as simple as a mop. But in the end, they clean out the heart. Emma laughed. Well, I'm not holding a mop anymore. Daniel nodded. No, now, you're only holding the future. And that day, for the first time in a long time, the sky opened up clear and bright. It was all very simple, really. A man had knocked on a door. But what entered was fate. And in the hands of a little girl, that fate had woven a brand new life. No words were spoken in the final scene, because some stories end in a way that only continues in the heart. And this was one of those stories.